So the broken windows theory is the idea that if you let minor transgressions go, then that encourages people to do much more heinous and serious crimes in response. And it actually comes from an experiment that was done by researchers who put a car in a neighborhood in Brooklyn, and they just wanted to see what would happen to it. It would be vandalized, damaged, whatnot. And it sat there for weeks, and nothing happened to it. And then they went by and they smashed in the front window. Within something like 8 hours, the entire car had been stripped, and the wheels had been taken, the battery, and everything valuable had been taken. So until someone smashed in that window and showed that nobody cared about the car, nobody would touch it. But as soon as the window was smashed, all hell broke loose. And that's the idea behind broken windows, is that if you go after homeless people, doing squeegees on people's car windows, or people jumping the turnstiles in the subway, then by showing that you won't let people do these minor transgressions, people won't do the more serious crimes. Now, I think there's almost zero evidence in support of that particular theory, but it's hard to test. It's very difficult to test, and really hasn't been much.
That's also a perfect example of a really interesting experiment that happened for real, and one thing happened one time in one place, from which it's been generalized about in a million contexts by a million people, and it just doesn't mean that it's real. So it's like, there's this other famous experiment that was also around Palo Alto, the jams, the 36 jars of jam, you know that?
Yes.
With the paradox of choice, where if you have a big display in a fancy store and there are 36 jars of jam, then a lot of people stop by and taste one of them, and then you give them coupons to buy. And then the next week they ran an experiment where there were 6 jars of jam and you got a coupon. And in the 36 jars, a lot of people stopped to taste, but then not many people bought. And in the 6 jars, not as many people stopped to taste, but more people bought. The conclusion from which was drawn that there's this thing called the paradox of choice, that when there's a lot of choice, that people kind of seem to want to like it and seem to participate in it, but they're paralyzed by it. But then there's evidence that comes along later that seems to overturn it. And you kind of have to look for the particular context of it, because just because something happens, just because a car in one place gets a window broken and then gets trashed, or because the jam gets bought in one situation, not next, doesn't mean that that's the way that human behavior happens, because it's dependent on a much more complex set of incentives and cues and behaviors.